I knew I was in trouble the moment I saw Brenda Carlson standing at the edge of my property line with her clipboard, and that pinched expression that seemed permanently etched on her face. My name is Frank Zimmerman, and I had just moved into Meadowbrook Heights, a planned community outside Phoenix, Arizona, about 6 months ago. The house was perfect, the neighborhood was quiet, and everything seemed like a dream until I realized that the homeowners association here ran things like a military dictatorship. Brenda, a 48-year-old woman with shoulder-length blonde hair that she always wore in that specific soccer mom style, was the HOA president and took her job more seriously than most people take their actual careers. I was in the middle of having a new gas line installed for the outdoor kitchen. I had been planning since before I even bought the house. The contractor, a guy named Miguel who came highly recommended, had dug a trench running from my main gas line to where the new grill and pizza oven would be installed on my back patio. Everything was going smoothly until Brenda appeared. "Excuse me, Frank," she called out in that high-pitched voice that immediately set my teeth on edge. "I need to speak with you about this construction project." I wiped the sweat from my forehead. It was late May, and Phoenix was already hitting 95 degrees by noon. "What's the problem, Brenda?" She walked over, her white tennis shoes somehow remaining spotless despite crossing my dusty yard. "I've been reviewing the work being done here, and I have serious concerns about the depth of this trench. According to my measurements, it's not deep enough to meet code requirements." Miguel, who was taking a water break, looked up with confusion. "Madam, this trench is 18 inches deep, which exceeds the minimum requirement for residential gas lines in Arizona. The code requires 12 to 18 inches depending on the pipe material and location." Brenda pulled out a small measuring tape from her pocket like she had come prepared for this confrontation. "I measured it myself this morning when your crew was at lunch. It's only 16 inches at its deepest point." "You came onto my property and measured my trench while we were gone?" I asked, feeling my blood pressure rising. "As HOA president, I have the right to inspect any ongoing construction to ensure compliance with community standards," she said, raising her chin slightly. "And this does not meet standards. You'll need to dig it deeper." Miguel shook his head. "Even if it was 16 inches, which I assure you it's not, that would still be within code. I've been doing this for 20 years. The HOA covenants require all gas lines to be buried at a minimum depth of 24 inches, Brenda said, pointing to a section in the thick binder she carried. "It's right here in Section 12, subsection 4. I took the binder from her and read the section. It was vague at best, mentioning that all utility installations must meet or exceed local code requirements, but there was nothing specifically stating 24 inches for gas lines. "This doesn't say what you think it says." "I interpret it as requiring 24 inches, she insisted. "Well, your interpretation is wrong," I said, handing the binder back. "Miguel is following all local codes, and that's what matters." Brenda's face turned red. "If you continue with this installation at the current depth, I'll have no choice but to issue a violation and fine you accordingly." "You can't fine me for following the law," I argued. "I can fine you for violating HOA covenants, which you agreed to follow when you purchased your home," she countered. "The fine schedule starts at $500 and increases by $250 for each day the violation continues." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, which was conveniently located just 3 doors down from mine. Miguel looked at me with concern. "Man, I've dealt with some difficult HOAs before, but this is something else," he said. "What do you want to do?" I stood there, staring at the perfectly adequate trench, and made a decision. Keep working. She's bluffing. She wasn't bluffing. 3 days later, I received a certified letter informing me that I had been fined $500 for the code violation, and that if I didn't cease work immediately and remediate the problem, the fines would continue to accumulate. The letter also stated that I needed to submit detailed plans showing the corrected depth before any further work could proceed. I called an emergency meeting with Miguel. He brought his foreman, a guy named Carlos, and together we went over every measurement. The trench was exactly 18 inches deep along its entire length, sometimes even reaching 19 inches in certain spots. Miguel had photos, notes, and even measurements taken with a professional surveying tool. "This is ridiculous," I said, pacing my living room. "She's making up violations." "Have you thought about just digging it deeper?" Miguel asked. "I mean, I know it's the principle of the thing, but sometimes it's easier to just make these HOA people happy." I had thought about it. The problem was that digging deeper would require additional work, would cost me another $1,500, and would set the project back by at least a week. But more than that, it bothered me that Brenda thought she could just make up rules and force people to comply. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not rewarding this behavior. She's wrong, and I'm going to prove it." That weekend, I started doing research. I discovered that Arizona law was very specific about gas line installation depths. For residential lines operating at less than 1 pound per square inch, which was standard for homes, the minimum depth was 12 inches if the line was encased in conduit, and 18 inches if it wasn't. My line wasn't in conduit, so 18 inches was not only acceptable, but actually exceeded the minimum requirement. I compiled all the relevant building codes, printed them out, and requested a formal hearing with the HOA board, which was my right according to the very same covenants Brenda loved to quote. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, which meant the fines would continue to accumulate. I was now up to $2,000 in HOA violations. During those 2 weeks, Brenda made my life miserable in other ways. She sent me a violation notice for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection day. Never mind that I had brought them in the same afternoon, just like I always did. She sent another notice claiming my front yard grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. I measured it myself. It was within the acceptable range. Then she cited me for having a vehicle parked in my driveway overnight that didn't belong to a resident. It was my sister's car. She had come to visit for a weekend. Each violation came with its own fine, and I was beginning to understand that Brenda had a system. She was going to make living in Meadowbrook Heights so expensive and so miserable that I would either fall in line or move out. The problem was, I had just bought this house. I had sunk my savings into it, and I wasn't the type to give up easily. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I went over my notes, the building codes, Miguel's documentation, everything. My girlfriend, Lisa, who didn't live with me but stayed over most weekends, tried to calm me down. "You've got all the evidence you need," she said, rubbing my shoulders. "They're going to see that you're right." "It's not about being right with people like Brenda," I said. "It's about control. Then you need to take that control back." She was right, but I wasn't sure how. The HOA board consisted of 5 people. Brenda as president, a retired accountant named Harold Chen as treasurer, a stay-at-home mom named Jennifer Morrison as secretary, and 2 at-large members, George Peterson and Deanne Huang. I had met most of them at various neighborhood events, and they had all seemed reasonable enough. But I also knew that HOA boards often operated as rubber stamps for whatever the president wanted. The hearing was held at the community clubhouse, a modest building near the neighborhood entrance that hosted everything from book clubs to holiday parties. I arrived 15 minutes early with a folder containing all my documentation. Miguel couldn't make it because he was on another job, but he had given me a signed affidavit attesting to the measurements and methods used. Brenda was already there, sitting at a long table with the other board members. She had her own folder, considerably thicker than mine, and that same expression that suggested she had already won. "Thank you for coming, Frank," Harold said in a neutral tone. He was a thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses. "We've reviewed the violation notices, and we're here to listen to your response." I took a seat across from them, suddenly feeling like I was on trial. I appreciate the opportunity to address these charges. The primary issue is the gas line installation. Brenda claims the trench is too shallow, but I have documentation proving that it meets and exceeds all local building codes. I slid copies of the relevant code sections across the table, along with Miguel's affidavit and photos showing the measurements. As you can see, Arizona requires 18 inches for this type of installation, which is exactly what we have. Brenda immediately interrupted. "The HOA covenants require higher standards than local code. Can you show me where it specifically states 24 inches for gas lines?" I challenged. She flipped through her binder and pointed to the same vague section about utilities meeting or exceeding codes. "Right here. It says exceed. Exceed local codes, which we do by being right at the recommended depth rather than the minimum," I explained. "This section doesn't establish separate HOA depth requirements. It just says we have to follow the law, which I am." Jennifer, the secretary, looked uncomfortable. "Brenda, do we actually have specific utility installation standards in the covenants?" "The board has the authority to interpret the covenants as needed to protect property values and community standards," Brenda said quickly. "That's not the same thing as having an actual written standard," George pointed out. He was a large man in his 50s who worked in construction management. "I've looked at the covenants before, and I don't remember seeing specific utility depths." "Neither do I," Deanne added. She was a physician who always seemed pressed for time. "And honestly, if the local building code says 18 inches is fine, I don't see why we would require more." I felt a small surge of hope. Maybe some of these board members would actually be reasonable. Brenda's face was getting red again. "The issue is that he didn't submit plans for approval before beginning work." "Actually, I did," I said, pulling out another document. "I submitted the plans 6 weeks ago via email. Here's the confirmation that your HOA email account received and opened them." I had learned to document everything with Brenda. I had screenshots showing the exact date and time the email was opened. "I never saw those," Brenda insisted. "They were sent to the official HOA email address that's listed on the website and in all the community documents," I said. "If you're not checking that email, that's an internal problem, not my violation." Harold cleared his throat. "Brenda, have you been checking the HOA email regularly?" "I check it when I have time," she said defensively. "I'm a volunteer doing this out of the goodness of my heart." "But you're still obligated to actually do the job," George said. "If Frank submitted plans and we didn't respond, we can't then cite him for not submitting plans." The hearing went on for another 45 minutes. We went through each of the other violations Brenda had issued. The trash can violation was dismissed when I showed photos with timestamps proving I had brought them in on time. The grass height violation was dismissed when Jennifer pointed out that the measurement Brenda provided was within the acceptable range. The visitor parking violation turned into a heated debate about whether family members counted as visitors. which eventually resulted in the board voting to update the covenant language to clarify that immediate family could park overnight. When it came back to the gas line issue, the board took a vote. Harold, Jennifer, George, and Diane all voted to dismiss the violation and rescind the fines. Brenda was the only vote to uphold it. "This is a mistake," Brenda said coldly. "You're setting a precedent that homeowners can ignore reasonable safety concerns." "No, we're setting a precedent that we follow the law instead of making up our own rules," George replied. I left the hearing feeling vindicated but not victorious. I could tell from the look in Brenda's eyes that this wasn't over. She wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. Sure enough, 2 days later, I received another violation notice. This time, Brenda claimed that the work itself was creating a nuisance due to noise and dust. The thing was, Miguel had already finished the installation. The gas line was in, buried at the proper depth, inspected and approved by the city. We were done. I ignored the notice, figuring it was just Brenda being petty. Then she sent another one, claiming I had failed to properly restore the landscaping above the trench. I had seeded the area and put down mulch, exactly as required. She wanted me to install sod instead. I emailed the other board members, documenting Brenda's continued harassment. Harold responded quickly, saying he would speak with her. George replied that he was getting concerned about Brenda's behavior and suggested I keep documenting everything. The following week, I came home from work to find an official notice from the city building department taped to my front door. It stated that a complaint had been filed regarding unpermitted gas line work and that an inspector would be coming out the following day to investigate. My heart sank. I had all the proper permits. Miguel had pulled them before starting work. But now, I was going to have to deal with a city investigation because someone, and I had a pretty good idea who, had filed a false complaint. The inspector arrived at 3 in the afternoon the next day. His name was Robert Martinez, and he had the tired expression of someone who had dealt with too many HOA disputes. "Mr. Zimmerman, I'm here about a complaint regarding gas line installation," he said. "I have all the permits," I said, showing him the documents. The work was completed by a licensed contractor, and it was already inspected and approved. He looked at the permits and then at his paperwork. According to the complaint, the work was done without permits and at an unsafe depth. "Both of those claims are false," I said. "Who filed the complaint?" The complaint was anonymous, but it came from an HOA president claiming to represent community safety concerns, he said. We walked around to the back, and I showed him the completed installation. He took some measurements, checked Miguel's work, and reviewed all the inspection records. "Everything looks fine here," he finally said. "You've got proper permits, proper depth, proper materials. Whoever filed this complaint wasted everyone's time. Can you make a note of that in your report?" I asked, because I'm pretty sure this isn't going to be the last false complaint filed against me. He gave me a sympathetic look. "Yeah, I can do that. And between you and me, you might want to consider filing a harassment complaint with the county. False reports to building departments can result in penalties." That gave me an idea. After Robert left, I started researching Arizona laws regarding HOA governance and harassment. What I found was interesting. Arizona revised statutes had specific provisions about HOA conduct. Board members could be held personally liable for violations of their fiduciary duties, and homeowners had the right to sue for harassment if an HOA engaged in a pattern of unreasonable violations. I also discovered that filing false reports with government agencies was a crime, specifically a Class 1 misdemeanor under Arizona law. If I could prove that Brenda had knowingly filed a false complaint with the city, she could face criminal charges. I reached out to a real estate attorney named Patricia Valdez, who specialized in HOA disputes. Her office was in Scottsdale, about 30 minutes from my house. She agreed to meet with me for a consultation. Patricia was in her early 40s with dark hair and sharp eyes that immediately gave me confidence. I laid out everything that had happened: the gas line dispute, the bogus violations, the false city complaint, all of it. "You've documented everything?" she asked. "Everything. I have photos, emails, timestamps, witness statements, the whole thing." "Good. That's going to help," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Here's the situation. Brenda Carlson is clearly engaged in a pattern of harassment. The question is whether we pursue this civilly, criminally, or both." "What do you recommend?" "Civilly. You have a strong case for an injunction against further harassment, plus potential damages for the stress and expenses you've incurred. Criminally, the false police report is harder to prove unless we can show she knew the information was false when she filed it." "Do you think she knew?" "Absolutely. She had access to all the permit information. She knew the work was permitted and inspected." Patricia nodded. "Then here's what I suggest. We file a civil suit seeking an injunction and damages. We also file a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA governance. If we can establish the pattern clearly enough, we can then refer the matter to the county attorney for potential criminal charges." "How much is this going to cost me?" She gave me a figure that made me wince, but I was past the point of backing down. "Let's do it." The lawsuit was filed a week later. The complaint laid out every false violation, every bogus fine, and the false report to the city. We sued Brenda individually for harassment, and the HOA for failing to stop her conduct, despite being notified of the problem. The effect was immediate. I got calls from both Harold and George, apologizing for the situation and promising that the board was taking it seriously. Jennifer sent me an email saying she had voted to place Brenda on temporary administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Brenda, on the other hand, went ballistic. She hired her own attorney and filed a countersuit claiming that I was defaming her and interfering with her duties as HOA president. Her lawsuit was thin on facts and heavy on outrage, exactly what I expected. The legal process moved slowly, but things started happening in the background. Other homeowners in Meadowbrook Heights began coming forward with their own Brenda horror stories. Apparently, I wasn't the only one she had targeted. A retired couple named Tom and Susan Richards told me about how Brenda had cited them for having a vegetable garden in their backyard, claiming it violated aesthetic standards. They eventually gave up and removed the garden rather than fight her. A young family, the Nuyens, had been fined repeatedly for having toys visible in their front yard. Their kids were 5 and 7. Where else were the toys supposed to go? Even George, the at-large board member, admitted that Brenda had tried to cite him once for installing a solar panel system without HOA approval, even though Arizona law specifically prohibited HOAs from banning solar installations. I collected all these statements and passed them to Patricia. The pattern of harassment was becoming undeniable. 3 months after filing the lawsuit, we got our first big break. During discovery, we obtained copies of all of Brenda's communications regarding my property. Among them was an email she had sent to a friend, complaining about me and stating, "I know his gas line is probably fine, but if I can make his life difficult enough, maybe he'll think twice before doing anything else without kissing my ring first." Patricia nearly jumped out of her chair when she read it. "This is gold." She admitted she knew there was no violation. She was just harassing you. Does this help with the criminal case? I asked. Absolutely. This shows intent. She knowingly filed false violations and a false city complaint. I'm forwarding this to the county attorney's office immediately. Things accelerated after that. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously, with Brenda abstaining, to remove her as president. Harold took over as interim president and sent a letter to all homeowners apologizing for Brenda's conduct and outlining new procedures to prevent similar abuses. Brenda didn't go quietly. She filed an appeal with the HOA, claiming the board didn't have authority to remove her. She lost. She then tried to rally support among the homeowners for a recall election of the entire board. She got about 12 signatures out of the 300 homes in the community. Meanwhile, the county attorney's office opened an investigation into the false reporting charge. A detective named Sarah Williams was assigned to the case and came out to interview me. "Mr. Zimmerman, I've reviewed the evidence your attorney provided," she said. "I want to hear the story directly from you." I walked her through everything again. She took detailed notes and asked pointed questions about timelines and Brenda's knowledge of the permits and codes. "Have you had any direct threats from Miss Carlson?" she asked. "Not explicit threats, no. But she told me at one point that she would make sure I regretted moving to this neighborhood." "When was that?" "After the board hearing where they dismissed her violations. She said it in the parking lot in front of George Peterson." Detective Williams made a note. "I'll need to speak with Mr. Peterson." Over the next few weeks, she interviewed multiple people: Miguel, Robert Martinez from the city, various board members, and other homeowners who had experienced Brenda's harassment. The case was building. Then something unexpected happened. Brenda tried to access the HOA management company's computer system and delete records. The management company, which handled financial records and official documents for the HOA, had security systems in place. When Brenda tried to log in using her old credentials, which had been deactivated after her removal as president, the system flagged it as suspicious activity. The management company contacted Harold, who contacted Patricia, who contacted Detective Williams. Attempted destruction of evidence in a pending investigation was a serious crime. "She's panicking," Patricia told me during a phone call. "This is good for us, but it also means she's becoming unpredictable." "Should I be worried about my safety?" I asked. "I don't think she's violent, but keep documenting any contact. If she approaches you, don't engage. Just record what happens and notify me immediately." I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, I was mowing my front lawn when Brenda pulled up in her silver Mercedes. She got out and marched up to me, her face flushed with anger. "This is all your fault," she yelled. "I was a good HOA president for 7 years, and you come in with your entitled attitude and ruin everything." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Brenda, you need to leave my property. You think you're so smart with your lawyer and your evidence, but you're going to lose," she continued, ignoring my request. "I have friends on the county board. I have connections. You're going to wish you had just followed the rules." The rules I followed. The actual building codes and HOA covenants as written, not as you made them up, I asked calmly. "I never made anything up. I was protecting property values by filing false violations and lying to the city." She took a step closer, and for a moment I thought she might actually try to physically attack me. "You don't understand anything about running a community. People like you, who think rules don't apply to them, are why neighborhoods fall apart." "I'm going to ask you one more time to leave my property," I said, still recording. "If you don't, I'm calling the police for trespassing." She stood there for a long moment, breathing heavily, before finally turning and stomping back to her car. She peeled out of my driveway, leaving tire marks on the street. I immediately sent the video to Patricia and Detective Williams. Patricia called me back within an hour. "That was incredibly stupid of her," she said. "She basically admitted to the violations on camera and made threats. Williams is going to love this." She was right. Detective Williams showed up the next morning with a warrant for Brenda's arrest on charges of filing false reports, attempted tampering with evidence, and harassment. I wasn't there when they arrested her, but George called me to let me know what happened. "She tried to claim diplomatic immunity or something," George said, almost laughing despite the serious situation. "She kept saying that as HOA president, she couldn't be arrested for actions taken in her official capacity." "But she's not president anymore," I pointed out. Exactly what the detective told her. Anyway, they took her in. Her husband posted bail this afternoon. This whole thing is just crazy. The criminal case moved forward. Brenda's attorney tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that her actions were taken in good faith as part of her HOA duties. The prosecutor, an assistant county attorney named Michael Foster, shut that down quickly by presenting the email where Brenda admitted she knew there was no real violation. The civil case settled before going to trial. The HOA's insurance company, wanting to avoid a lengthy court battle and potential punitive damages, offered a settlement that included a formal apology, removal of all fines and violations from my record, reimbursement for my attorney fees, and a cash payment for damages. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was fair, and more importantly, it vindicated my position. The criminal case went to trial. I had to testify about the entire ordeal, from the initial gas line dispute through Brenda's attempted evidence tampering. Miguel testified about the proper installation procedures and how he had followed all codes. Robert Martinez testified about the Falls City complaint. George and other board members testified about Brenda's pattern of abusive behavior. Brenda's defense was that she had been acting in what she believed were the community's best interests, even if she was mistaken about the specific requirements. Her attorney tried to paint her as an overzealous volunteer who had made some errors in judgment but hadn't committed any crimes. The jury didn't buy it. After 3 days of testimony and only 4 hours of deliberation, they found her guilty on all counts: 3 counts of filing false reports and 1 count of attempted tampering with evidence. The sentencing hearing was 2 months later. I submitted a victim impact statement describing the stress, expense, and disruption Brenda's actions had caused. Other homeowners submitted similar statements about their experiences with her harassment. The judge, an older woman named Patricia Hernandez, was not sympathetic to Brenda's situation. "Miss Carlson, you held a position of trust within your community," Judge Hernandez said. "Homeowners relied on you to be fair, to follow the rules, and to act in the community's best interest. Instead, you used your position to harass and intimidate people who didn't bow to your personal whims. You filed false reports with government agencies, wasting taxpayer resources and potentially causing serious consequences for innocent people. When faced with the consequences of your actions, you attempted to destroy evidence. This court takes these matters very seriously." She sentenced Brenda to 1 year in county jail, suspended after 90 days served, followed by 3 years of probation. Brenda was also ordered to complete 200 hours of community service, pay restitution for the city's investigation costs, and was permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. Brenda broke down crying when the sentence was read. Her husband, a quiet man named Donald who I had only met once or twice, looked devastated. I almost felt sorry for her, But then I remembered the months of harassment and the thousands of dollars in legal fees and stress. After the sentencing, Patricia and I stood outside the courthouse. It was early October, and Phoenix was finally cooling down to reasonable temperatures. "So how do you feel?" she asked. "Honestly, exhausted," I said. "I just wanted to install a gas line for my grill." She laughed. "Well, you've got your gas line, plus you've helped set a precedent that HOA board members can't abuse their positions without consequences. A lot of homeowners in Arizona are going to benefit from this case." She was right. The case got coverage in the local news and in HOA industry publications. It became a cautionary tale about the limits of HOA authority and the consequences of abuse of power. Life in Meadowbrook Heights gradually returned to normal. Harold served as HOA president for the remainder of Brenda's term and then declined to run for re-election. A retired engineer named Paul Foster took over and implemented new procedures requiring board approval for any violations over $100 and establishing an independent review process for disputed violations. Brenda served her 90 days in county jail and was released on probation. She and Donald ended up selling their house and moving out of state. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that they relocated to Oregon to be closer to their daughter. The other homeowners who had been harassed by Brenda felt empowered to speak up about other HOA issues. The board revised several covenant provisions that were outdated or overly restrictive. The vegetable garden ban was eliminated. The restrictions on children's toys were relaxed. The visitor parking rules were clarified to allow family members. I finally finished my outdoor kitchen. Miguel came back and did the final connections, and we had a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate. About 50 people showed up, which was a pretty good turnout for a random Saturday afternoon. People brought side dishes and drinks, and kids ran around the yard playing. It felt like what a neighborhood should be. George came over while I was grilling burgers and handed me a beer. "You know, you could have avoided all of this if you had just dug the trench deeper like she wanted." I flipped a burger and thought about it. Yeah, I could have. But then, she would have kept doing the same thing to other people. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when it's expensive and exhausting. "Well, on behalf of everyone in Meadowbrook Heights who suffered under Brenda's reign of terror, thank you," he said, clinking his beer bottle against mine. Lisa, who had stuck by me through the entire ordeal even though we had only been dating for about a year when it all started, came over and wrapped her arm around my waist. "Is this finally over?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "It's finally over." And it was. The gas line worked perfectly. The outdoor kitchen became the gathering place I had envisioned. The HOA board operated reasonably and fairly. Brenda served her time and moved away, and I never heard from her again. Looking back on the whole experience, it was a valuable if expensive lesson about the importance of documentation, the willingness to stand up for yourself, and the reality that sometimes doing the right thing requires more effort than just going along with unreasonable demands. I kept all the documentation from the case in a folder in my office, not because I expected to need it again, but as a reminder. A reminder that rules should be based on actual requirements, not personal preferences. A reminder that authority comes with responsibility. And a reminder that homeowners have rights, even when dealing with HOAs that sometimes forget that fact. The following spring, I was elected to the HOA board as an at-large member. I hadn't planned to run, but several neighbors encouraged me, saying that someone who had fought so hard for fairness should help guide the community's future. I accepted, figuring that I could help ensure that no one else had to go through what I did. My first board meeting was surreal, sitting at the same table where I had once defended myself against bogus violations. Harold was still president, and he welcomed me warmly. "Any old business?" he asked, going through the agenda. Jennifer, still serving as secretary, flipped through her notes. "Actually, yes. We received a request from the Martinez family on Seguero Street. They want to install a gas line for an outdoor grill." Everyone turned to look at me, and I couldn't help but smile. "I move that we approve their request, provided they follow all local building codes," I said. "Second," George added immediately. "All in favor?" Harold asked. "Aye," everyone said in unison. "That was easy," Jennifer said, making a note in the minutes, and it was, because that's how it should have been all along. After the meeting, as I walked back to my house in the warm evening air, I thought about how much had changed in just over a year. I had moved to Meadowbrook Heights looking for a quiet place to live, and instead, I had gotten an education in community governance, property law, and the importance of standing up for yourself. The outdoor kitchen was still going strong. I used it at least 3 times a week, and it had become known in the neighborhood as the place where people gathered for impromptu cookouts. Kids would smell the pizza cooking and wander over with their parents. Neighbors would bring ingredients and we would make meals together. It was everything I had envisioned when I first planned the project. Sometimes I would stand out there, watching the flames in the pizza oven or flipping steaks on the grill, and think about Brenda. I wondered if she had learned anything from the experience, if she understood why her behavior had been so wrong. Part of me hoped she had found peace in Oregon, that maybe losing everything had taught her humility. But another part of me doubted it. Some people never learn. What I did learn was that communities work best when rules are reasonable, enforcement is fair, and everyone remembers that we are all neighbors trying to live our lives. The HOA covenants existed to protect property values and maintain standards, not to give petty tyrants a way to bully people. Under Harold's leadership, and then Paul's, Meadowbrook Heights transformed into a genuinely pleasant place to live. The board focused on important issues like maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and ensuring that actual safety concerns were addressed. Petty violations like grass being a quarter-inch too tall became a thing of the past. Miguel became a good friend. He lived in Temp, but came over occasionally to check out the outdoor kitchen and make sure everything was still working properly. He told me that he had used my case as an example when dealing with other difficult HOAs, showing them the legal documentation and explaining that homeowners had rights. "You have no idea how many HOAs backed down when I mentioned the Zimmerman case," he said during one visit. "Some of these board members think they're untouchable until someone actually challenges them." Patricia, my attorney, stayed in touch as well. She told me that she had seen a noticeable decrease in HOA abuse cases in the Phoenix area, which she attributed partly to the publicity around my case. Board members were being more careful, and homeowners were more willing to push back against unreasonable demands. "You did a good thing, Frank," she told me during a phone call, updating me on trends she was seeing. "These organizations need oversight and accountability." The criminal case against Brenda became part of Arizona legal precedent. Law schools started using it as an example in property law and criminal law courses, discussing the boundaries of volunteer authority and the consequences of abuse of power. I was invited to speak at a few community events about HOA governance, which was weird but also satisfying. Donald, Brenda's husband, reached out to me about a year after they moved to Oregon. He sent a letter apologizing for Brenda's behavior and explaining that she had been under a lot of stress that he hadn't fully understood at the time. He said she was getting therapy and trying to understand why she had become so controlling and vindictive. He didn't ask for my forgiveness or anything like that, just wanted me to know that they were working on things. I appreciated the letter. I wrote back, saying that I hoped Brenda found peace and that I bore no personal animosity toward either of them. It was true. I had been angry during the ordeal, but once it was over, I just wanted to move on. Lisa and I got engaged that summer. I proposed in the backyard, next to the outdoor kitchen that had caused so much trouble. She said yes immediately, laughing about how fitting it was that the proposal happened at the site of my great gas line battle. Only you would turn an HOA dispute into a romantic story, she said, kissing me. We got married the following spring in a ceremony held at the Meadowbrook Heights clubhouse. Half the neighborhood showed up, and we had the reception catered with food cooked on my outdoor kitchen. It felt like the perfect way to close that chapter and start a new one. George gave a toast at the reception, joking about how I had gone from neighborhood pariah to board member to beloved community figure, all because I refused to dig a trench a few inches deeper. Everyone laughed, but there was truth in it. Standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult and expensive, had earned respect. As I stood there with Lisa, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, I thought about how different things could have been. If I had just given in to Brenda's demands, I would have saved money and stress in the short term. But I also would have enabled her to continue bullying other people. I would have taught my future kids that it's better to go along with unfair treatment than to stand up for yourself. Instead, I had fought back, and it had made a difference. Brenda faced consequences for her actions. The HOA reformed its procedures. Other homeowners felt empowered to challenge unreasonable demands. It wasn't just about my gas line anymore. It was about something bigger. The outdoor kitchen is still there, still being used regularly. The gas line that caused all the trouble is buried 18 inches deep, exactly as it should be, exactly as it was from the beginning. Sometimes when I am out there cooking, I think about all the drama and legal battles and stress, and I can't help but smile. It was worth it. Every dollar spent on legal fees, every hour spent documenting violations, every stressful moment wondering if I was doing the right thing, it was all worth it. Because in the end, fairness won. The bully was held accountable. The community became better. And I got to keep my gas line at the proper depth, which was all I wanted in the first place.